I want to do a reading from Demetri Martin's book called This is a Book. And this book is just like his comedy. It's hilarious. It's silly. He's got all these cool drawings in here too, just like he does on some of his stand-up stuff. He's hilarious, really fun dude to read. This is another one of those probably good for if you had a basket of or a bin of books in the bathroom. A basket or a bin of books in the bathroom. Anyway, this would be a good one for that because it's got a lot of short stuff in it. And this is a book. It's got a little drawing on the front, Demetri Martin. And the one I want to read, we'll call it an essay, whatever you want to call it, is the beginning of part 2 called Dad. I have trouble communicating with my father. I always have. I just can't relate to him. Of course, there's the generation gap between us. He was almost 40 when I was born. That certainly has not helped things. But it's more than that. Fundamentally, we are just too different. In fact, sometimes I feel like we couldn't be more different from each other if we tried. But my father is different from just about everyone I've ever met, which is no surprise when you consider his upbringing. He was raised by wolves. You may have heard stories about the boy who was raised by wolves. Most people have. I know I have. Just about every day of my life. My father always had a knack for bringing up that subject. No matter what the conversation was about, he'd find a way to relate it back to wolves. Person talking to my dad. It's pretty hot out today. My dad. Yeah, it is. And you know, this weather feels even hotter to a wolf because of the fur and everything. Speaking of wolves, it doesn't matter how remote the topic is, my dad will find a way to make it about his wolf upbringing. Person talking to my dad. The economy is really in trouble. My dad. Tell me about it. I think they really need to raise consumer confidence. Speaking of things being raised, when I was raised by wolves, I won't bore you with any more examples. Suffice to say, Dad's wolf thing is a constant presence in our lives. Whenever someone new meets my father, I have to prepare them for it. People often get confused by my dad's accent because he talks with a pronounced growl. On top of the growling, Dad can become quite aggressive, especially if you look him directly in the eye. And I always have to tell people not to throw a frisbee anywhere near my father because he will chase it and catch it with his mouth, or at least try to, as it bounces off his face. I've always had to be careful about where I bring my dad. He was the chaperone to my prom. That turned out badly. I guess the strobe light set him off or something because he went ape shit and tried to maul a couple of people on the dance floor. Luckily, he's not actually a wolf, so one of the other chaperones, my chemistry teacher, Mr. Ronner, was able to wrestle Dad to the ground and subdue him. Even though no one got hurt, it made the rest of the senior year suck for me, especially chemistry class. I read somewhere that some parents have trouble letting their children shine, especially those who have become accustomed to being in the limelight. That's my dad. From the minute he became part of society, he was lavished with attention, and man, did he lap it up. Pun intended, by the way. In our town, everyone always talked about my father and his remarkable story. Whenever anything remotely involving wolves happens, people contact my dad for a soundbite or for one of his trademark wolf freakouts, which he is always more than happy to do for the morning radio DJs and local news people. It is so embarrassing, and going to the zoo with my dad has always been a nightmare. You've never seen a know-it-all until you've seen my father at a zoo. Look, I realize that his story is remarkable-ish. And I understand that being raised by wolves is not an easy experience. Nobody's denying that. But he's not the only one who had a tough upbringing. Mine was hard too. Not too many people ever think about that. No one ever thinks about the guy who was raised by the guy who was raised by wolves. Well, that happens to be my life, and I'm here to tell you that it's just as hard, maybe even harder than being the guy who was raised by wolves. First of all, you have a non-wolf imparting wolf teachings. This is confusing under the best conditions. When I was a little kid, it was more than confusing. It was downright upsetting. The chasing, barking, the general canine behavior my father displayed around the house often terrified me and ruined a lot of my childhood experiences, not to mention my bedroom furniture. My father's wolf background really colored my view of the world as a child. Dad hated fairy tales. If you even mentioned one to him, he'd launch into one of his long, self-righteous speeches about wolf stereotyping and the damage done to the wolf community by the prey-biased fairy tale media. His parenting skills were minimal to non-existent, and when he did try to raise me, it felt a lot more like being trained than being raised. Although I have to admit it was often quite effective. When your father bites you in the back of the neck, you learn things pretty fast. Of course, Dad never stopped to ask me about my interests. He just assumed I was interested in wolves. Every year when Halloween came around, guess what we had to be? Yeah, a pack of wolves. And my mother went right along with it, just like everything else Dad wanted. She always enabled him. And if I tried to talk to her about it, she would say things like, "What do you expect? He was raised by wild animals." As if I didn't know that already. Thanks, Mom. One time I asked my mother if she thought she would have been with my father if he had not been raised by wolves. She got really quiet and looked hurt. Then without saying anything, she turned, walked off, and went into the backyard to feed my father. I never brought it up again. Mom's not the only one who enables my dad. My little brother, who is an actual wolf my parents adopted, is crazy. It doesn't take a genius to guess whose dad's favorite is. Yeah, it's my brother, Gary, the real wolf. Gary and I never got along as cubs and kids. And now as adults, we don't even talk, mostly because he can't. But even if he could talk, he's so unreasonable and ferocious, I wouldn't want to talk to him anyway. When Dad had our last name legally changed to Wolf, it didn't sit well with a lot of people, least of all with me. Having the first name Wolf was already hard enough for me. Then finding out suddenly I'd be called Wolf Wolf for the rest of my life just flat out pissed me off. Try going to a dinner party and getting introduced as Wolf Wolf. My friend, have you two met? No, well let me introduce you. This is my friend Wolf Wolf. Hey, what? When I say my name, people often think I'm joking, or worse, barking. Wolf Wolf. I remember complaining to my father about this and then having to listen to one of his usual lectures about how I'm not proud of my wild roots, etc. Man, he's so out of touch. Sometimes Dad has the wolves over. This never goes well. My grandparents, if you can even call them that, are even harder to relate to than my father. They're actually crazy. When I'm with them, I get the feeling that they would kill me if we weren't related. Dad disagrees with me about this, but he just doesn't understand. He can't see anything outside of his little wolf bubble. One time when I was actually attacked by a wolf, no relation, my father pretty much took the wolf's side, even though he didn't even know the wolf personally. That really hurt, and I've never forgotten it. Probably the worst fight my father and I ever had was the time I called him a cliche. He stormed off to his den in the backyard and howled out there until one of the neighbors called the police. For all of its problems, though, I can't say there haven't been some great things about having a dad who was raised by wolves. Camping with him has always been a lot of fun. Dad is great at hunting and tracking and running around aimlessly in the woods, and he's hilarious with squirrels. When I was a kid, he was never strict about making me clean my room, which was nice, and he's always been entertaining, especially if you give him some meat. I'm able to appreciate these things now because about 2 years ago I started seeing a therapist. That's helped me a lot. Shortly after starting therapy, I joined a support group for people who have difficult parents. That's where I met Melinda. Melinda's mother was some sort of princess who met Melinda's dad when he saved her from up in a tower or something. Anyway, Melinda can really relate to a lot of the things I've been going through. I mean, her mom lives in a small castle in their backyard. Melinda and I recently started dating. For the first time in my life, I feel like someone truly understands me. Things are going really well. Even my dad likes her. The other day, he told me he thought she smelled right for me. I'm doing a lot better these days. I'm coming to terms with my past, and I'm hopeful about my future. I know I'll never fully understand my father, but we're making strides. I am who I am in a lot of ways because of my dad. I am proud to be Wolf Wolf. And even though sometimes I might feel like I've got it rough, I guess when you think about it, everyone has crazy parents. Some were even raised by a pack of them. Alright, that was Dad by Demetri Martin and his book titled This Is a Book. Pick it up. It's a good read. It's a quick read. It's a fun read for sure.